Blessings, good evening. We have a few questions have come in tonight. The first being, Lumpur, are the Baramis conditional Dhammas, meaning they arise, stay for a while and cease eventually? If so, does that mean one loses some of the Baramis one has developed in this lifetime, in the next birth, and will need more development to bring them back to where it was? In general, mental qualities, good and bad, as you say, they're conditioned dhammas, they're things that arise dependent on different causes and conditions, then they pass away. Mental states, because that's the way the mind, the mechanism of the mind works. So, separate moments of consciousness, mental states arising, passing away. So that gives us the chance to change things in our mind and the way we view the world, and for us to cultivate the Buddhist path, because this mechanism, this process, we can use to our advantage. We can condition this mind in a good way, develop good qualities, and so that they come up more and more. We accumulate them. So often we use, with the word barami, we use the word accumulation. We accumulate them over time through the practice. Barami means sometimes translated as perfections. These special qualities of Dhamma. And one aspect which isn't so much in the name but is implied is that they're qualities that don't disappear very easily. They become part of your mental makeup or who you are, and can therefore have a long-term conditioning effect on your mind based on the understanding of samsara being made up of many, many lifetimes. Well, baramis, good qualities, skillful qualities we've developed, can travel with us a bit like our possession or our luggage, in a good way, through each lifetime. The goodness that we accumulate stays with us. But of course it's not absolute. Good qualities of mind, baramis, can fade. They can intensify and become strong, and they can weaken depending on the conditioning process, on what we do, how we live, how we use our mind, whether we practice or not. And there's 10 baramis, the usual list. So baramis such as generosity, renunciation, sila, morality, effort, virya, and so on. You can look them up. But they're not fixed. So if we get distracted or stray from the path, we have obstructions, we have problems that really make us stop practicing or not practice very much, or give up faith in the Buddha and his path and so on. Well, these baramis can fade from our consciousness and not come up very often and not be very strong. But the implication, as I said earlier, is that a barami is a quality that does stay with you. So it's something you've kind of learnt and acquired, and it will tend to stay. But we only reach enlightenment, you could say, when these 10 paramis are perfected. Or for a Buddha, we talk about 30 baramis. As you practice and develop them, intensify your practice of them, then they, say for a Buddha, they're perfected on three levels, three depths. So it's what you might call the ordinary depth, and then there's barami, and then there's upabarami, which refers to like saying, for example, but not solely this, you may, in the process of cultivating parami, maintaining parami, you may physically weaken your health, or you may even lose a limb or something like that. So sometimes they say upabarami, an example of that is, when you go without food for a while because you're fasting and just meditating a lot, or you go without sleep because you're putting a lot of effort into practicing mindfulness. You go without things, so maybe physically you're a bit weakened, or put your body under pressure, your health is under pressure. Or if you give an organ transplant while you're still alive, you donate a kidney, say. Or you do something that really pushes you in the course of your practice to develop barami, say like metta barami, maybe you really help someone and it takes its toll on you. You're cultivating a very strong quality and it may become deeply rooted in your mind, such as metta, goodwill, but at the same time there may be a cost to your health or your well-being in some way. You sacrifice a lot to make these baramis. So that's the second or intermediate level that all the Buddhas have developed. And then the third level, the highest level, paramatta barami, even willing to sacrifice one's life to further and to develop the barami. So you probably heard the legends of the Buddha in his past lives, maybe sacrificing his life to feed the mother tiger with her cubs, and they're starving, so to allow them to throw oneself off a cliff or whatever, and then allow them to eat one's body, eat one's flesh, so that they can stay alive, but you die. And that's the ultimate sacrifice, you might say. Or the Buddha as a soldier or a king or a leader going out into war and dying for a cause. Or as a leading monkey in a troop of monkeys facing a hunter and sacrificing himself. Or as a child sacrificing themselves for their parents, and this kind of thing, where in order to further the practice, it may even lead to the sacrifice of one's life. So these three levels for a Buddha. So a bit deeper, and the baramis of the Buddha built over many, many lifetimes, longer than a sāvaka, a student or an enlightened student of the Buddha, the arahants, won't have made barami or accumulated barami for so long. Next question. I heard a comment that says a person's particular parami can sometimes be hidden in this lifetime, even though it has been developed to a certain level in the past, but it may reveal and blossom in another birth. Is that correct? Could you explain more? Well, going on from this earlier question about the baramis being mental qualities or dhammas that are conditioned, so having faith in the Buddha, following a teacher, following the Buddha, committing to keep precepts, practice mindfulness, put effort into the practice generosity, put effort into that, and so on. Committing and then practice will reinforce the baramis, and that process will go on from life to life. So one can be accumulating and reinforcing baramis, these qualities, to deeper and deeper, and get them really firm and established in one's consciousness. You could say it's a conditioning process, But one can do that through the practice. But maybe at some point a severe or really powerful obstacle can arise to stop one's further development, and whatever barami one has developed so far maybe cannot really flourish in certain conditions. They kind of go dormant. So maybe, like in the case in the time, you hear the stories in the time of the Buddha, someone like Devadatta, the Buddha's cousin, had great skill with samadhi, must have had some insight and wisdom, all kinds of different qualities he had developed, but he was also plagued by wrong view based on the defilements, extreme jealousy, rage, anger, directed towards the Buddha. So his own barami that could have led to his enlightenment didn't. They were kind of suppressed to some extent. He used some of his skills, but they were also suppressed because he was so caught up in a very worldly view of things and wanting to take over the Sangha and hurt the Buddha and get rid of the Buddha. So the Buddha said when Devadatta died, well, at some future point he's going to become a Pacceka Buddha. So that's not a small thing. He's obviously got a great accumulated good karma, good barami. But in that life, because of his rage towards the Buddha, that was stopping these baramis from coming to fruition and developing further. Or another one associated with that, Ajahn Sadhu, the prince, who ended up under the influence of Devadatta killing his own father, patricide, which is a very heavy karma. We call that anantariya karma, which blocks one from attaining the Dhamma and from a good rebirth when one dies, if you make such a heavy karma. And the Buddha said after Ajahn Sadhu killed his own father, the king, said, this is a great shame because he had the right qualities, the right insight and the right barami, accumulated barami to become a Sotapanna in this life. But he didn't because he made this big mistake, a big blunder. So the biggest obstacles to developing barami or to suppressing barami that one's already developed are the kilesas. One can get a wrong view, and instead of doing good, one does something very bad, and so obviously the good qualities one may have developed in the past go dormant or fall into the background, and the more unwholesome qualities take the lead. Things like that. Or it could be somebody has great barami, but they they're just very ill for a lifetime because of past karma. They're overcome by injury or illness, so they can't really pursue and develop the baramis that they have before. So you can see that it's possible, even somebody's done a lot of good, there can still be obstacles that can be quite powerful, have a powerful effect, an obstructive effect on their development of the Dhamma, in the path of the Dhamma. It's possible, yes. Next one is from the Chinese YouTube channel, but it's luckily in English. Dear Luang Por, if there was no Atman or no self, then who is the one observing the thoughts and the breath? Well, on the conventional level, we talk about a person, don't we? We say there's one who meditates, there's one who is mindful of the breath, there's one who practices Dhamma, follows the Buddha. On the conventional, the ordinary level, we talk about a person, a self, who's doing all that, because it's convenient. But on the higher level, the ultimate level, or the deeper truth, we say there's no person. What we take as a person is what we call the five khandhas: body, feelings, memory, perception, thought formations, and sense consciousness. these 5 groups of experience that make up a human being, we kind of bundle them together, make a kind of solid person or being out of them and say, that's me. And this is the root cause of our problem. Through ignorance, misunderstanding, we take this body and mind and the khandhas as self when they're not, because they're subject to, they're conditioned things. They're subject to arising and ceasing change. There's no lasting Atman or self in them, except for we fail to see that, or our starting point is that we fail to see that. But the Sotapanna has already seen, the stream enterer sees that as a wrong view, that this body is not a self and it's impermanent and it will die. And the bodies of everyone else around you will die, they'll all die. They see the impermanence very clearly on the level of their view and their understanding, but they still have some attachments. It's only the Arahant who's seen right through the delusion of self. So, as you practice, sometimes we'd say you're shedding this sense of self from the coarsest level, the normal level where we take everything as me, mine, myself, a person, a being, somebody who meditates, somebody who develops mindfulness, somebody who knows things, sees things, somebody who's ignorant, doesn't see things, somebody who's suffering, somebody who's peaceful. We're always seeing and interpreting from the point of view of self, but as we practice, we start to peel away some of these layers. And you could say, well, who's peeling away the layers? But this is, you could say, the good effects of our practice. The mindfulness and wisdom we develop naturally will peel away layers of self, layers of attachment, layers of wrong view that create and sustain this sense of self. They get undermined, peeled away through the practice, until ultimately there is no self left, and one knows that. So there's no longer this question, who is mindful, who is letting go, who is letting go of attachment, and so on. That question and that understanding has changed. Well, that's something you have to experience and realize for yourself. You can't really put it into words and pass it on to someone that way. If we could, then everyone would probably be getting enlightened a lot quicker. It's something you have to realize through the practice. But maybe just work on these 2 levels at first, the conventional, normal or assumed level, that there's a person, a being with a name who practices, and that's convenient. But as you become more mindful, experience states of peace, stillness, samadhi, and then investigate the Dhamma, this sense of self will start to be eroded away and disappear. Ajahn, am I correct in understanding that for the 5 precepts we do not have to be in a monastery to observe the 5 precepts? We can observe them on a daily basis at home, and we don't have to wear white. True, correct. These are 5 guidelines for skillful living wherever you are, whoever you are, and they're not linked or bound up with clothing. People do wear white clothing to practice the Dhamma, often in monasteries, as a kind of uniform or reminder that they're practicing, and sometimes at home, but it's not essential. What you're training is the mind, training intention to refrain from killing, stealing, and so on. These 5 precepts or guidelines you take on voluntarily, and you can do that anywhere, at home, at work, in the monastery, and you don't have to wear white. And through experience, reflecting on them, reminding yourself of them, adhering to them, you get better and more familiar with them, and then maybe quite naturally you keep the 5 precepts most of the time, unless you're caught out in some way, your mindfulness slips, or you're caught in a strong mood. For example, anger might lead you to kill a fly or do something harmful maybe. It will happen maybe, but generally you get to the point where you're just practicing the 5 precepts automatically without thinking a lot about it. At all times, in all situations, that becomes your set of values and practices for your life. And that's how the Buddha was encouraging us to practice wherever we are, not just in the monastery. Dear Luang Por, I have broken a precept. Can I blame it on not self or on the aggregates? You can blame it on anyone. You can blame it on your best friend. You can blame it on the government. You can blame it on anyone. Blame it on me. But that doesn't mean to say this blaming is correct. But observe it, isn't it? We love to blame somebody or something for our mistakes. And because we are practicing to realize not self, well, it's a sort of cleverness of the kilesas, the mental defilements, that like to twist things a bit and say, well, if there's no self, there's no one to blame, there's no one who did anything wrong, so I can do anything I want. There's no one to receive the fruits of karma. No one makes good karma, bad karma, because there's no self. Which is why we still use the convention of self to avoid getting too confused or allow our own cleverness to hide our mistakes, our unwholesome tendencies. What it does is, if you say there's no self, then there's no one to experience shame or to reflect on the consequences of their actions, so it doesn't matter what you do. So it's actually not a helpful development to go that way, but you hear people say it. So on the normal level of practice, yes, there's a self, there's this person, and I make karma, good karma, bad karma, through body, speech and mind, and I need to train my mind to give up the intention to make bad karma so that my mind becomes more peaceful, more clear, more mindful, and then insight, develop that through contemplation. So we still use the concept of self because it's useful, it's helpful. Having said that, sometimes people do go to the extreme of when they do make a mistake, break a precept for example, they go into a guilt trip where they become so caught up with self-aversion, self-blame, what we call guilt, anxiety, that they just can't settle down, they can't let it go, they can't forgive themselves, and they just carry around a lot of pain over and over again, maybe for many years even. So we tend to go to these extremes. We're either not responsible enough and we say, oh, there's no self anyway, it doesn't matter. Or perhaps we go too far and we can't operate properly because we're so plagued by guilt and feeling bad about ourselves that we just feel paralyzed. So of course we'll make mistakes in the course of our practice, we'll do things, follow unskillful intentions sometimes. The idea is to try and make yourself mindful and aware as soon as possible, understand what's happened. But also you have to forgive yourself, that was a mistake, okay. Even bad mistakes, in the end you have to move on from them if you're going to grow. If you're going to learn, you have to move on. Even very terrible things people sometimes do. You have to acknowledge it and move on and establish this new intention not to follow that same course of action again. And we keep working on it until it becomes natural not to hurt ourselves, hurt other people. So blame, can have a little bit of a role in just establishing for yourself what you did wrong and reminding yourself not to do that. But the idea of punishing yourself is probably coming from an unwholesome root, maybe aversion, or punishing someone else. We have to be careful because, again, it will lead to aversion. And maybe we make more bad karma by punishing someone. And here I'm not talking about the legal system of a country or something. I'm just saying in the way we think and relate to each other. Next question. Will or can young children's action result in bad karma despite their age and their ignorance? Unfortunately, children can make bad karma as well. Like you say, they are often very ignorant of the world or inexperienced or naive, and they're just not aware of what they're doing or the consequences. That happened for me, and I imagine it happens for pretty much every kid. The common one is you kill things when you're a kid. You just do it out of curiosity or for fun or following your friends, and you just don't realize what you're doing. So kids quite often kill or harm animals and sometimes each other, but not so much, but it can happen. And they do many other things, depending on their age, who they are, what the situation is. But it's still karma. The strength of the intention behind the act may vary. It may not be the same as an adult sometimes. Maybe, as I said, it may just be out of ignorance, curiosity, not sure what you're doing, haven't really thought about it, but just do it or say it and make some bad karma. And it's maybe not a strong intention, but it's still an intentional act, so that's still a karma. It's very sad. Often kids do kill or hurt mainly animals, but occasionally people. They don't know what they're doing, and it's sad partly because maybe there should be an adult around to tell them what they're doing and stop them, and that doesn't always happen. So that's part of the parental responsibility, or anyone in a position of responsibility like a teacher or a guardian. We try to show by example and then also through explanation, show the kids what they should do and what they shouldn't do to try and protect them. And we don't always do a good job at that. Sometimes we don't talk about karma because obviously maybe someone doesn't understand karma or use that way of talking. But if you could give kids the way to reflect on karma, to see that their actions have consequences and those consequences come back on them, it does matter, even though it's not always immediate karma, immediate consequences. Sooner or later it will come back on them, particularly something like killing. You want to try and get them to see it's just not worth it for their own interests, and of course killing harms other beings, for example, or stealing or whatever. You get them to see the suffering they're creating for others, the suffering they're creating for themselves, and get them to think in that way regularly, so then they can start using the concept of karma to help protect themselves from making further bad karma. But this is mainly the job of the parents, isn't it? And it's not always easy, I know. Lumpur, do we have to be a vegetarian? Not all monks or nuns are vegetarian. True, it's not compulsory for a Buddhist monk or nun to be a vegetarian. For Sangha, the rule is you can't eat meat that's been seen or you suspect or you've seen somebody kill for you. So if somebody tells you, I killed this for you, I caught this fish to feed you, we're supposed to not receive that or not eat it. Or if we know someone is going to go and kill an animal on our behalf so that they can feed us, we say, no, don't do that. But we can still eat meat if it's been just purchased in a store in some way and cooked and presented to us. We can't eat raw meat, not allowed to eat raw meat. And there's certain animals, even if it's been obtained without that person killing on behalf of the monk, there's certain kinds of meat we can't eat, such as snake, elephant, tiger, bear, and so on. There's a number of those animals. But if it's just sort of the ordinary kind of food that people eat and they share that with us and it happens to have meat in it and they didn't kill it on our behalf, we are allowed to accept it. But then a Sangha member may individually take on the practice of being a vegetarian, but the Buddha didn't say it's compulsory, so some will eat meat, some won't. And that's up to each individual. And so, some Buddhists who've become noble ones, enlightened, have done that and eaten meat on their way. So it's not something that prevents you from reaching enlightenment if the meat is just provided in the proper way and offered as a form of food. And sometimes, probably almost on a daily basis, people offer monks and nuns meat dishes, especially if you're wandering around villages collecting your food in different parts of the world. A lot of the people you meet eat meat normally, and that's what they'll offer you. It's very common. So monks have become enlightened and they eat meat along the way. It's not because they want to kill or encourage killing, it's just that's the food that is provided in that particular society. But if you choose to be a vegetarian, that can be a very good thing, and it can promote compassion in your own mind and maybe in the minds of others as well. But it's a personal choice. Dear Lumpur, after an individual has done something wrong, the mind is aware of fear and shame, which means that it is craving to become pure. When one is keeping the precepts, one may also crave to enjoy sensual pleasures. This means that the mind is always flipping from one side to another. Why is the nature of the mind so uneasy? Why can't it begin with purity or emptiness? Perhaps it does, and you just miss it. As I was saying earlier, every moment, consciousness is made up of separate moments, and perhaps every moment, a bit of emptiness, the mind is returning to this empty state, and then it picks up another thought, another object to absorb into, and it's so fast you don't notice. But if your mindfulness improves, maybe you focus more on the emptiness of the mind than each new thought or object, and then you can start letting go of defilements that condition the mind. So one thing, you mentioned the mind is aware of fear and shame, which means that it is craving to become pure. Well, it doesn't have to be craving to become pure, maybe just be coming from wisdom. That if you make bad karma, it hurts you. And it hurts you over and over again maybe, and it hurts other people, and it leads to more suffering, more rebirth. And you could say that's wisdom, not craving. So the desire for pure mind, for peace, for nibbana is not necessarily craving. Can become mixed up with craving and desire, but can also just be coming from a wholesome understanding of the way things are, and you just say, keep the precepts, because then you're free of all that regret, anxiety, guilt. Your mind is steady, because when you don't keep precepts, it tends to make you very agitated, jumpy, suspicious, fearful, and so on, or sad and regretful. But when you keep the precepts, your mind becomes more steady, stable, and it becomes very suitable for developing samadhi and for developing insight. So, that's one thing. We don't just crave to become pure simply, but when you recognize you've done something, said something harmful to yourself, to others, it's correct to say, this is a cause of suffering, I'm going to change. That's correct, I would say. But the mind does flip, yep, because defilements come up, sometimes unexpectedly, fast, unpredictable, and you might be very peaceful and doing good things and not bothering anyone, and suddenly, through the power of old karma or a certain set of conditions arises, anger arises, or greed or lust arises, or some foolish desire arises, almost out of nowhere. It's not out of nowhere, but it can seem like that, and take over the mind, and your mind is flipping. And like you say, keeping the 5 precepts, you're still going to be surrounded by a certain amount of sensuality. You may still have a partner, sexual partner, you may have kids, you may have a job, you may be living in the world, earning money, spending money on all kinds of things. But if you keep the 5 precepts well and really go into the meaning of them, you are actually training your mind to abandon sensuality, the coarsest kinds of sensuality, things that harm your stream of consciousness. So even the 5 precepts, you're steering away from many kinds of unwholesome speech, action, activities that promote sensuality. You're actually abandoning them and changing the way you spend your time, what you think about, what you talk about, what you do. So don't underestimate the power of the 5 precepts. But true, yes, the 5 precepts are for living in the world where you are surrounded by sensuality. So that's one thing you have to become mindful of. And sensuality, because it's surrounding you, you may make your mind flip at any moment. You just don't know what's coming. So that's why you have to be on guard. Develop the hiriyottappa, sense of shame, awareness of the consequences of unwholesome actions. Develop mindfulness, effort, patience in the, when you're tempted and when things are happening that tempt you to become angry or get greedy or do something very unwholesome. There's all kinds of challenges that you have to meet living in the world. And so it's not a small thing to keep the 5 precepts well, but they are the way to go for anyone wishing to practice the Buddhist path, not just for Sangha, but for laity. Paul, recently I read news about someone who passed away after being in a coma for 20 years. It made me wonder where that person's consciousness was for those 20 years. What is Buddhism? What does Buddhism say about comas and vegetative states? Well, if someone ends up in a coma, it's obviously a sad thing. I think as a general reflection, we'd say it must be the result of some karma, either this life or a previous life. Maybe one has done something to somebody else, hurt them, put them into a coma, done something or other that has come back in this way of where you remove all the freedom of movement and speech, and basically what do they call it? You're locked in when you're in a coma. Your mind is still there, so where's your consciousness? Well, it's right there. You're still consciousness because you're alive, but you can't speak, you can't talk, you can't communicate, or you're maybe not in a coma, but maybe you're paralyzed and you just move a little bit. So it's like a form of prison, I guess you could say. And that may be for many years. So that's obviously some unpleasant, unfortunate karma coming up. There's many other things you could be doing if you were mobile and active and normal, but you're in a coma, so you're alive but unable to do very much. So it's very sad. But who's to say exactly what's happening to the mind? Because there are those stories of people who have come back from a coma sometimes, being able to talk again, being active again, and they said, well, during their coma they could still hear people talking to them, they still could think, they could still know what's going on around them, but just not able to respond. So I would imagine there's comas and there's comas. I haven't studied this. There's some maybe worse than others. It's obviously not something you want, so, again, try not to make the kind of bad karma that may lead you ending up in a coma. That's one reflection. But if it happens, if you're caring or with someone who's in a coma, well, just give them a lot of support and love, and maybe even talk to them, read the Dhamma to them. You can maybe still do things that could have an influence on them. Very hard to know, and it will depend on each person's individual situation, I guess. But perhaps there's still things we can do to help care for those individuals in comas. I remember when I was a teenager, and sometimes teenagers, especially males, can do really foolish, stupid things when they get angry or drunk or whatever. And I remember two guys having a fight, two teenagers having a fight because they were drunk. Can't even remember what they were fighting about, but one of them went on the floor and the other one kicked him in the head, knocked him unconscious. Luckily in that case, we revived him and he went to hospital, and he seemed to be okay afterwards. He wasn't in a coma or anything. But I was already reading Buddhist books, and I thought at that point, you kick someone in the head who's lying on the ground. What's going to happen to you? What kind of karma might come back? So maybe you do things like that, and you end up in a coma yourself. Are we all right with the techniques?
No, the video has frozen, but the audio is working.
Okay. Sounds like we have technical problems, so I don't know if you can hear or see me. Ajahn, I often find my mind is in a state of calm and stillness when I listen to your Dhamma talk. Is it okay to cling to the Dhamma talk? Will the clinging refer to the 5 khandhas? However, when I chant, I find my mind wandering sometimes. What are the tips to stay focused on the chanting? Well, listening to Dhamma talks is one form of practice. You could call it a kind of meditation. Listening to the words, keeping still, keeping focused and aware, mindful, partly to understand the meaning and maybe gain some new information or remind yourself of things, partly to gain some peace, because Dhamma talks have that effect. Because you're talking about Dhamma, it can have that effect to bring peace to people's minds. But even peace, even insight, even knowledge, we can cling to, like you say. So I would suggest, well, if you cling, but without clinging too tightly. Meaning, on this conventional level we've been talking about, of a person, a being, studying and practicing the Dhamma. You've got to cling to something to start with, don't you? You cling to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, to the teachings, to the meditation object, to your precepts, to the goodness you make. You cling to that, but don't cling so tightly that it becomes a cause of suffering. So in the case of listening to a Dhamma talk, maybe you get annoyed if you can't remember something that was said, or if the Dhamma talk goes on too long, maybe you cling and you get upset that you want to do something else. So reflect. Part of our practice is always to reflect on cause and result, and so even good things, good practices can become a basis for clinging, attachment, suffering. So that's something you have to reflect on. There's no harm in using Dhamma talks to help calm your mind, focus your mind, train yourself to listen, to understand. But maybe you pointed out that you cling to a talk. Well, try to observe to see where that might lead to suffering. and adjust your attitude a bit. As far as chanting goes, well, the same. Chanting can be a very skillful way to train the mind, a kind of meditation. As you chant, whether you're reading or memorizing the chant, your mind will wander. Everyone experiences that. So you come back to the chant like you come back to the breath or any other meditation object. And you use chanting that way to train the mind, particularly if you're tired, scattered, have a strong emotional state that's bothering you, and maybe other forms of meditation are difficult. Sometimes chanting can help. Chanting tends to bring you to think of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha very directly. Often you chant things that bring up a good feeling, faith, and even some insight as you reflect on the words perhaps. So it can be a very valid practice, and especially in our busy lives when we're often tired but we want to do something that trains the mind, we can chant. Or at difficult times when we don't know what else to do, we can chant. So it has a role, I think, in our practice, but you have to experiment and learn how to use chanting skillfully. Ajahn, how can I be mindful all the time with sila? It seems impossible for me to be mindful all the time. How can I have strong mindfulness all the time to practice in daily life? I don't want to be a Dhamma robot. Well, I'd say better to be a Dhamma robot than a Kilesa robot. You know, a lot of the time in life, I think people are acting a bit like robots, for want of a better word. You know, we're doing things on autopilot. We're doing things with delusion, without much mindfulness or understanding, without much full awareness of whether our state of mind is wholesome or not, and what we're doing and what the purpose of it is. We're often not very aware, so we're more like a robot, and that's because of the influence of defilements, greed, anger, delusion, and the conditioning process of what they do to the mind. Whereas the Dhamma, it can seem robotic sometimes, can seem repetitive, it can seem limiting, because sometimes the Dhamma means you restrain things, you're acting in a restrained, peaceful way. But I don't think it really is robotic, because the whole central point of Dhamma is to develop awareness and wisdom and insight into things, to understand things, and free the mind from suffering. So even though it may appear a bit robotic, I wouldn't worry about that. The Dhamma is definitely the way to go. Ajahn, does one need to be at a temple or monastery to practice well? Can one practice well at home? Yes. It's just difficult. More difficult perhaps than at a temple or a monastery, because it's more distraction, obviously. Homes are not necessarily set up to support Dhamma practice, especially if you've got a home full of young people who don't know anything. Babies, teenagers, and sometimes adults who have no interest in Dhamma as well. You know, it can get confusing, difficult, not necessarily the best environment, but you have to make the best of what you've got and where you're at in your life. If you have young kids, well, that's going to have to be part of your Dhamma practice, say. But what many people do over time, say their kids grow up, or they are able to arrange their life situation better, or maybe they do set up their home to support Dhamma practice. So they keep their home quiet, clean and tidy, maybe simplify things a bit. They may have a space in a room or an actual room where they meditate, and maybe have a picture or a statue of Buddha, and that's the place that they go regularly to meditate. And that reinforcement of meditating in the same place regularly can have a very powerful effect to help your mind be calm when you do your meditation, chanting the same, listening to Dhamma the same. And you can arrange routines. The more freedom to do that you have in your home, the more you'll be able to support your Dhamma practice. And people will do retreats at home, especially if they've only got one or two other people around, and they can discuss it with them and set it up so they can have a retreat, a day retreat or a week-long retreat or whatever at home. So it's possible. But you have to work at it, and you have to create these conditions, partly through your own thinking it through, contemplating what will support the Dhamma. And that takes time, but we've got time, and so why not set up your home to practice the Dhamma and support your Dhamma practice. If you do that, then eventually you might be ready to move into a monastery. But just see how it goes. Nowadays we have the benefits of using modern technology to listen to Dhamma talks or to learn chanting from a distance. If we hear inappropriate comments or see or hear inappropriate actions, how should we react? To avoid giving rise to anger. Should we take a deep breath and walk away? Can. If we're talking about technology, usually you have the power to turn it on and off, or what you're going to watch, what you're going to listen to, you have that choice. In the case of other people's technology, well, maybe it does influence you, but maybe you can turn away or focus your mind on other things. So we should filter how much news, entertainments, info that we get from the internet, social media and so on. We have a responsibility to filter it, limit it, practice in accordance with the Noble Eightfold Path, seeing technology as simply an extension of a means to an end. You can use technology to support the Dhamma, like listening to Dhamma and so on, or you can let the technology dominate your mind and you become addicted to things and become scattered in whatever else is stimulated, like you say, anger, lust, anxiety. So we have to be responsible, we have to be careful, contemplate it, and then maybe set up your own plan for how you're going to use technology on a daily basis, the limits, where you can use it well, and then where it's a hindrance or a problem, well, how to manage that and set aside the technology if needed. And you can make rules for yourself, guidelines that you follow and so on. So yes, I would definitely think about this part of your practice and try to implement some wisdom in how you deal with technology. Ajahn, is it acceptable to listen to a Dhamma talk or meditate in a bedroom when lying down? If I can't sit for extended periods cross-legged because of my knee problems, so can I lie down to listen to Dhamma? Yes, you can, if there's really a good reason, and some form of illness, injury or joint problem, whatever it is, may be a good reason. You're better to listen to the Dhamma lying down than not at all. You can even chant lying down. It's hard, vocal cords don't work so well, but maybe chant softly. You can listen to chanting, you can chant softly to yourself, if you have to. I would experiment, if you're practicing the Dhamma and you have various health issues, I would experiment what the middle way or the right way is for you. Sitting up, lying down, standing, walking. There are some options, and maybe you have to experiment to see what you can do. If you can't sit, maybe you can walk meditation. If you can't sit to listen to Dhamma, well, maybe you sit on a chair. I would imagine you can sit on a chair, or you can lie down. The danger with lying down is we tend to fall asleep. it's harder to maintain and develop samadhi lying down. So it's not recommended, but if there's no other choice, better than nothing. So especially as you get older, weaker, iller, well, it may be one option to continue your practice in the lying down posture sometimes. But if you haven't reached that point, I wouldn't recommend it. I'd recommend standing, walking, sitting are better postures. Ajahn, when we do business, we wait for the good opportunity or the timing, the low interest rate and so on to make a deal. Will this be considered greed? Just using the word deal already sounds like there's going to be a bit of greed there, isn't it? You want to make your money, make your killing. Even the words we use, make a killing. So be very difficult for not to have some greed slip into it, but then that's part of the karma of being a layperson involved in business, buying and selling in some form, whatever. You have to accept that, but of course keep contemplating and see where you can catch your greed and think of skillful ways to deal with it. So one obvious skillful way is to practice dana. So I know many people who are successful because they're intelligent, they can do business, they can start their own company or work for someone else, but they can make money and do all kinds of financial transactions, business deals and so on. And they probably would be honest and say, yeah, there's always some greed coming in, the desire for success, wealth, of course, it may slip in. But if they go off then and do other good things, they do voluntary work, they do charity, they make donations, they're not just collecting all this wealth for themselves or their family perhaps, but they're also sharing it with society or people who need it. This counteracts this endless desire to make more money. Because if you keep making money and then giving it away, eventually you might think, no need to make any more money. Maybe that's the time you become a monk or a nun. So that's one of the reasons we practice dana, is to counter the natural desire for making money, collecting wealth, getting power, getting advantage in life. Because ultimately it won't bring you peace and it stimulates a lot of greed and attachment. So you practice dana. That's not the only practice, you also practice contemplating impermanence. You make your deal, you get the satisfaction, your greed is satisfied for a little while, but it's impermanent. That feeling of satisfaction fades. The money, wealth that you make may get used up or change its value, or you use it up, or you lose some, you win some. Some deals you make profit, some deals you make a loss. Contemplate impermanence, that will also be an antidote to greed. It's not sure, is it? You don't always make a profit, you don't always make the same profit. After a while you might get so tired of all this uncertainty and changing conditions, and again, you're ready to do more meditation, go off on a meditation retreat. Enough of the making money. So contemplate impermanence, practice kindness, charity, observe what greed does to your mind. If that is something coming up and you've seen it, you become less caring about other people perhaps, more self-centered, more ruthless. Maybe it brings up some more ugly qualities in you if you see it happening, and maybe that's a sign you need to change and do things differently. You have to come to this conclusion and practice for yourself, but definitely, be aware of greed and what it does to the mind. Last question tonight. We've been going on a long time. I'm not sure you can hear me because apparently there's technical problems, but anyway, last question is, Dear Ajahn, I am very grateful for your teachings and consider you to be my teacher, though I live very far from you in another country. I listen to your meditation and Dharma talks and questions and answers. Living at this distance likely means I will not have the opportunity to meet with you in person. I experience a wanting or a desire for this, for meeting, and I'd like to abandon this feeling, yet find it difficult to do so. Letting go of this wanting is even an additional hope or desire. I am in a conundrum at times when my mind wanders in this direction. I'm grateful to live in this time when computers can make communications and connections that once upon a time were unavailable. In what way can I practice to help overcome this specific desire as it relates to you, the person I consider my teacher? This has been on my mind for a very long time, and it's only recently I've asked you this question. With gracious thanks for your continued guidance. Well, again, contemplate impermanence. Even if you do live with a teacher, right next to them every day, see them every day, eventually they die or you die. You're not with them forever. And probably before you or they die, you'll separate for other reasons. So most of us have teachers, one or more teachers, sometimes Sangha member, sometimes lay teacher, and here I refer to living teachers. But you're not with a living teacher all the time. Even if you live in a monastery, you're not with your teacher all the time. You see them from time to time, and then you go away and practice, and then you come back and see them. So sometimes you're living with them, sometimes you're living far away, but you come to see them, get to know them. Sometimes that's just not possible, like you say, maybe in another country. But at least we've got recordings, YouTube, Zoom, Facebook, whatever it is, or tonight maybe nothing. So maybe I'm talking to myself, I don't know. Better than nothing if you've got the technology. And once a teacher does pass away, you've still got the words, hopefully, like, I first became a monk when Ajahn Chah was alive. Now he's dead for many years, but I can still listen to his talks and read his talks, which stimulates the Dhamma. So it's still, after the event, you can still get something. And that's as I lived with Ajahn Anand for 10 years. Now he lives in Thailand, so I rarely see him. But I can listen to his talk, think of him, and so on. So, you relate to your teacher on a number of levels. One is visual, and so living with a teacher or being with them for periods of time can be very useful, almost essential. It's a very good thing. But if it's not possible, well, you do the best you can with books, video, audio. But maybe it's also something you have to try, and once in a while or once in a lifetime, make the effort to go and see a teacher. Make the effort to travel if it's possible. So that's just something to think about. But you do the best you can and try and get the teacher in your own heart. So whatever I've taught or other teachers have taught you, get the words in your mind, in your memory, get the qualities of the teacher that the teacher has been encouraging you to develop, the mindfulness, the kindness and compassion, the patience, the wisdom and insight, all the qualities we encourage in our teachings. You want to develop them inside, and you can recollect the teacher, maybe that will bring those qualities up, or strengthen them, or help you to maintain them when you're wavering, or whatever. You recollect the teacher, it's what we call Sanghanusati. And that can be an individual who represents certain qualities, can be the qualities as you've seen in that individual. But you bring them up in your own mind, reflect on them, bring them up with mindfulness, and that can strengthen your practice, and it can even be a form of meditation. So you have to do the best you can. So that's the end of the questions tonight. As I said, I don't know if you can even hear me, but if you can, I hope it was useful, and we'll leave it there for tonight.